All right, today's second review is going to be of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which is the first one, which I think has an actual title because, yeah, the first three is just Mission Impossible 1, 2, and 3. So the fourth one started to get like its own title and kind of a little deviate a little bit from obviously like the actual, like now we're getting a real storyline kind of thing, right? Kind of. Uh, Kind of following the story a little bit, obviously off of like the third movie now, and now we're getting into like nuclear launch codes and stuff. But I feel like this is all sort of like basically the technology is just getting a little bit more advanced each movie, right? As we can kind of see. Yeah, I don't think we ever realized that, like looking back, but from the last movie, they kind of just show us that, like, right from the rabbit's foot, it was all kind of just escalating so quickly that I don't even think we realized that it was all sort of connected in a way. So it's kind of cool to go back and watch these movies now and see like the little pieces that kind of put them together that maybe we didn't even pick up on now that we kind of have a complete story, right? So yeah, it's just kind of cool to see. So in this one, for this movie, I gave it a 9 out of 10. Now this one, I will say that the stunts in this one are kind of starting to finally pull away from the first three movies. Now, I won't say that he didn't do some crazy stunts in those movies for sure, but I mean, I think just the obviously the safety towards them and everything, and just being able to perform them at a higher caliber now, like him climbing the tower in Dubai, and just the whole sandstorm scene with him driving down the highway, and there had to be others too, like when he just rappels back down the building and doesn't have enough line to make it to the window and so on and so forth. Like it was just there's just so many insane stunts in this. Even in the prison in the beginning when he's like jumping from floor to floor seems almost a little bit more intense than even some of the older movies, I will say. And just yeah, just the intensity of this movie is just ramped up a little bit, like even when they're in the Kremlin and him and Benji are trying to find the files or whatever. Yeah, it's just a much more intense movie, I will say that. And it had a little bit of a bigger cast, I would say, than some of the other movies in the past, obviously. Like a lot more names that were needed to be mentioned, I will say. So we'll go over the cast now. So Tom Cruise, obviously, as Ethan Hunt. Jeremy Renner as Brant, who is a new, like a new team member, I guess. Well, kind of becomes a team member, obviously, after he's, after his, after the secretary there is killed, right? Simon Pegg as Benji, Paula Patton as Jane. So I think Jane Carter, so Agent Carter, I do believe was her name. But yeah, we'll just call her Jane for the sake of that. Michael Nyquist, who played Hendrix, who was like the main villain in this movie. Vladimir Mash, Mash, Mashkov, yeah, who played Sidorov, who was a cop that was after Ethan for most of the movie. I'm thinking that he was the cause of what happened at the Kremlin, but we all know it actually wasn't. Samuel I. Edelman, who played Wistrom, who was a. Now, I know he was working with Hendrix, but I can't remember his exact role. But I think. Was he like an arms, or was he kind of like, I guess, like just basically like a bodyguard, maybe essentially for Hendrix? I'm trying to remember exactly who Wistrom was like in the storyline because there was so much going on between Ethan and Hendrix that I think Wistrom kind of got like left in the sidelines a little bit. Then we had Ivan Shevdov, who played Leonid Liskiner, who was basically the guy who was able to decipher the codes if they were real or not. So he had a pretty big role to play in that whole like meeting in the hotel there or whatever. Yeah. Um, uh, Anil Kapoor, who played Berjnath, who they had to get the codes from the satellite to in order to stop Hendrix and Wistrom from being able to launch the actual nukes. So yeah, he was just like a billionaire, like a really rich guy who had access to the satellite, right? Leah Sado, who played Sabi Moreau, who was an assassin, who was obviously also after the codes, but I think she was more after it just because she was trading the, like, she was basically supposed to be trading the codes for diamonds, right? Like, that's what she was after. Her money was more in the diamonds. She didn't really care how she got them, like what kind of shady deals she put down. She was just like happy that she got her diamonds so she could sell those, I guess. Um, Josh Holloway, who played Hanway, was it? Or Hanaway? Hanaway. Agent Hanaway, right. And he was the guy at the beginning that had the file that contained the nuclear launch codes that ended up being stolen by Moreau when he didn't have enough time in order to even identify her before she killed him, right? Pavel Kritz, who played Marek Stefansky, who was the man who was the courier of the codes, who Hanaway was after. And then, of course, obviously, he wasn't the only one after him, right? And then ends up getting killed himself over the codes. Madjar Gabrick, who played Bogdan, who was a friend that Ethan made in the prison at the very beginning of the movie when he was pretending to be this guy named Sergey. Michelle Monaghan, obviously, as Julia Mead, who was his wife. Ving Rhames, again, who played Luther Stickle, but he was only at the end of the film in this one. And then Tom Wilkinson, who played the IMF secretary in this movie. So we'll go back to Budapest in the very beginning of the film, where an agent is killed over a file he is holding. So that kind of sets up for what's going to happen, obviously. So then when we go to Moscow, Ethan's team helps him escape from prison, but he goes back to save his friend Bogdan. So I guess he was just saving this guy because he had made friends with him and wanted to take care of him. So that just goes to show you, again, like what I said in I think my last review, like how much more selfless Ethan is becoming throughout these movies, right? And I don't like it. He was probably doing it for a reason because he had a feeling he was going to be able to get Bogdan to help him maybe later on. I'm not really sure. But yeah, it just seemed like he was just saving him in the very beginning of the movie, right? For like just the reason to say, hey, like I've made this friend. I want to make sure he gets out of here okay, sort of thing. So Agent Carter tells Agent Hanaway, he tells that Agent Hanaway was the one who lost the file. The courier of the file was Marek Stefansky. Or Stefansky? Stefarsky. Maybe it was Stefarsky. Was it Stefarsky or Stefansky? Now I'm confused. Stefansky. Sorry. I guess I just wrote sloppily here. I don't know why. Yeah, so she was telling Ethan that story. I don't know why I wrote down she was telling Agent Hanaway. No, she was telling Ethan that Agent Hanaway was the one that lost the file and that the courier was Marek Stefansky, right? So she does tell Ethan that the file contained Russian nuclear launch codes, that the IMF has been looking for someone under the codename Cobalt who worked with Moreau in the past. So I guess maybe Hendricks and Moreau had worked together because we do find out that Cobalt is Hendricks. So I'm assuming they had maybe done some sort of deal together in the past, or they were at least doing a deal now, right? So Ethan and his team must infiltrate the Kremlin. Ethan must disguise himself as a Russian general. And then I guess Benji was kind of there to, like, obviously help him set up when they got inside, right? Ethan and his team must abort when someone taps into their frequency, giving them away, and then the Kremlin is blown up, and Ethan wakes up in the hospital. He does eventually escape from the hospital, and that was one of the stunts, too, that I thought was really cool, where he, like, zip lines down to the car. So he definitely put his body on the line a little bit more in this movie, too. So I think probably I would say that this one was a little bit more comparable stunt-wise, I would say, to probably number 2. Like, number 3 had the one big one in it where he does the fulcrum thing, but I think this one had quite a few more, and maybe some that I'm not quite remembering. But yeah, that was definitely one of the stunts for sure. And then obviously the building in Dubai, and like the whole car chase scene where he gets hit by the car and a whole bunch of other stuff. Like it's just yeah, the stunts in this one were just a little bit more high caliber compared to some of the other movies. Um, so he does meet with the secretary of the IMF, and that is when he also meets Brandt, who is just supposed to be like his analyst, right? And then Ethan discovers the true identity of Cobalt, and that the president has invoked Ghost Protocol, and that the IMF has been disavowed. So basically, at this point, anything Ethan does is like going against the government, right? But the IMF secretary tells him, this conversation never happened, and to continue on with the mission in order to find Hendricks and the codes, right? So he basically gives them all free reign, and then all of a sudden he gets shot, and then Brandt and him have to escape, and they have to get onto like the train car with like the retinal scan or whatever, and then it's just literally the team is at this point Ethan, Jane, Brandt, and then Benji at this point. So it's just the four of them kind of working together. And of course, I don't really know. Brandt just kind of comes along, obviously, because Ethan isn't going to leave him behind to die, right? Like, he's just going to bring him in regardless because he's still technically working under the secretary that he trusted enough to go and meet. So I guess that makes sense that he's going to bring him in. So, yeah. Has been disavowed. Kurt Hendricks, aka Cobalt, is a nuclear extremist. So they're kind of watching this video on him as he's talking about how basically nuclear warfare could be a good thing. I don't see how, but yeah, definitely it's not going to be good for anybody, because if there's a big of enough nuclear war, it could wipe out the entire planet, right? So as a nuclear extremist, Moreau and Wistrom are planning to meet and trade the nuclear launch codes in Dubai. They do discover that as well, obviously. So they want to stop that so that Wistrom can't get the codes back to Hendricks, right? And they're hoping that Hendricks will obviously show up there so that they can catch him as well. Now they're not sure where he's going to be, because obviously he's not going to, yeah, they're basically thinking that Wistrom will lead them back to Hendricks, I think was their plan, right? So when they get to Dubai, Ethan must climb the building from the outside to hack the building's security, because without that, Benji can't really do anything at all to make a copy of the launch codes so that he can make one fake and one real. And I think, yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Like, I think they were supposed to basically get the real codes themselves and then give the fake ones to Wistrom, but of course that other guy ends up coming in that can read the codes, right? So they have to end up making like an actual real copy of the codes to give to Wistrom, and then he leaves and ends up killing that guy anyway after he says, I've done my part, like, why can't you just let me go see my family? And he basically tells the guy on the other end of the phone to kill the family, and then he kills him right there. So, of course, they don't want Moreau to be dead. Like, Ethan considers her an asset. But, of course, Jade and her get into this fight, which ends up ending with Jane kicking her out the window in their own room. And, of course, we know that the window was completely removed so that Ethan could climb the building earlier. And that scene was just funny, like, with the gloves or whatever. But I do know, or at least from what I've seen, he did actually free climb that building. So I'm not exactly sure, like, what kind of, like, what he was using to free climb, before he ended up, like, I imagine the gloves and stuff are probably just, like, extra in the movie, but, yeah, he was actually free climbing that building as far as I've heard. So, yeah, Tom is definitely one of the craziest guys when it comes to acting. Like, he really does care about his craft and wants to, like, he's willing to put his own life on the line just to make a solid scene. So I have to give him credit where credit is due, right? So then, yeah, Ethan and his team set up 2 separate rooms to make 2 identical meetings happen, so that Wistrom and Moreau think that they've met, but they never actually did. So then Ethan chases Wistrom down, only to discover that it was Hendricks the entire time. So yeah, he was actually chasing Hendricks disguised as Wistrom. So I think that Wistrom just probably brought that other guy along just to make sure that the launch codes were legit. But I feel like Hendricks would probably have known whether they were legitimate or not on his own. But I think maybe he was trying to put uh, pressure on them, obviously, to like hand over the launch codes. Uh, maybe that was the plan. Yeah, it was just so weird because Moreau was handing she was handing the launch codes over to them, right? And then Brant was making a copy of them to send to Wistrom's room that Jane was in order to, you know, make sure that both of them had a copy. It was just so weird. Um, so Ethan then confronts Brant about being just an analyst. Brant tells of a mission after Ethan has left to meet with Bogdan again and some other guy that's a little higher above him in order to uh, change the plan, basically, is what Ethan's trying to do. So Brant tells of a mission to protect a husband and wife when a Siberian hit squad was after them. Uh, Brant was ordered to not warn them, which resulted in the wife being killed. And then he didn't ever see the husband again until a few days later, or a few days earlier from where they're at now, when Ethan Hunt entered into the car with the secretary. So yeah, it was Ethan and Julia that he was supposed to be protecting, and then I guess obviously we know that Ethan went after the Serbian hit squad and killed them all, and so on and so forth. So now they are traveling to, and he didn't know how to tell Ethan obviously about what had happened. So he blames himself for Julia being killed, right? Now, of course, Benji kind of goes, no, she left him, and you know, it kind of hit with the hard news right at that moment, right? So they travel to Mumbai, where Ethan and his team must get the codes for the satellite in order to shut it down so that Hendricks can't use it to launch the nukes. Now, at the same time, oh yeah, uh, so I think Brant gets the worst of this one because he has to pull off the stunt where he jumps down into the computer and Benji catches him with like the magnets and then like sifts him through the computer so that he's able to like change out the system. It was a little more complicated than that, obviously, but there was so much information being thrown at me at one time that I was like reversing a little bit to try to get like bits and pieces of what was going on. But essentially, eventually, Hendricks just ends up putting a virus into the satellite, stopping Ethan and his team from gaining access to it. So Benji gives Ethan Hendricks' location so that Ethan can get to him and stop him from launching any of the nukes. Now, on the way, unfortunately, in the Magellan Rise, on the Magellan Rise in the Central Pacific, Hendricks launches his first nuke from that site. So now Ethan must find a way to abort the warhead, but must get the case from Hendricks in order to do so. So this is kind of like a manual job, basically at this point, because now Wistrom has like totally tore the server apart. So now Benji has to kind of hopefully put it back together piece by piece, and Jane gets shot in the process of all of this by Wistrom, and then it was Brant that has to go and try to turn back on the power, and they just do it in the nick of time. And that whole fight scene between Hendricks and Ethan in the carport thing, where the cars are going like up and down the levels, and the briefcase keeps falling, and then eventually he says to hand it over, and Hendricks just like jumps and lands on the ground, and then Ethan has to like drive the car off of the port, and I don't know, it was like a crazy drop anyway, like I think about 100 and something feet they said, and smashes straight into the ground, and the airbag goes off, and he has to crawl over to the case, and he hits the button, he goes, mission accomplished. And of course, obviously it's not, because the power hasn't turned back on yet. So it ends up hitting the tower and then falling into the water. So luckily they were able to disarm the warhead, but they didn't have very much time to do it. And then, of course, it was Sedorov that ends up catching up with him at the very end of the movie to find out that it wasn't actually him that caused all the havoc at the Kremlin, that it was the guy laying beside him. But of course, like, he's like, oh my god, who's going to believe this story at this point, right? Um, so, yeah, Benji must hook the relay up, must hook the relay back up for the board codes. That's what they call it, the relay. So then we go back to Seattle after the mission is complete, and Ethan picks all three of them to continue to be part of his team. Now, I don't think Jane ever comes back in any of these movies that I remember in any capacity, but we do know that Benji and Brant do, at least for one more. Brant is in it, right? So Ethan tells Brant that he faked his wife's death in order to protect her. So I guess he was actually on a mission at that point in order to try and find Hendrix, and he killed the Serbian hit squad in order to get himself into the prison. Now, I'm not exactly sure who he was supposed to meet in the prison. Maybe it was Bogdan. I'm kind of thinking that that almost makes sense now as to why he ended up saving Bogdan, because Bogdan ended up leading him to this other guy that led him to the satellites and so on and so forth, right? Like, yeah, so it all kind of ends up, I guess, just lining up together, right? And then, of course, he knew that, I guess he knew that this guy was going to end up contacting Sedorov anyway, so he knew that Sedorov would be following him, and he was hoping he could just pull off what he needed to before Sedorov could catch up with him. It's all crazy. Like, Ethan was definitely, like, on point in this movie for sure with the mission, right? So then, of course, he gets to see his wife from a distance, and Brant is now part of the team, and of course, Brant has like a huge weight lifted off his shoulders, knowing that obviously he wasn't the reason, he wasn't the cause of anything significant in Ethan's life, right? And he said, it wasn't your job to protect her, it was mine, and she was never going to be safe if she was around me all the time, right? Like, I'm here, she's much safer if she's away from me, sort of thing. Now, I know that obviously Julia does return in later movies, and she is put in danger again, but I don't think, like, obviously she's, a little bit safer the farther she is away from Ethan, I would say, that's for sure. Because if the third movie said anything about how much danger she could be put in, I would say that, yeah, he needed to kind of separate her from him a little bit, right? In order to feel a little bit more, I guess, content with what he was doing, right? Because he doesn't obviously want to leave the field yet. I think probably after the third movie, he does feel a little bit of guilt towards letting somebody who he allowed into the field die. And now Benji is in the field, so now he probably feels a lot more like he has to protect, sort of thing, right? So it just makes sense that he's going to stay there and protect the ones that he feels the closest to, right? So yeah, and then when he disappears at the end of the movie, he's getting a mission briefing about this agency called the Syndicate now. So that leads us obviously into like the more kind of established story that we get throughout the next, I think, 2 or 3 movies. At least 2 for the Syndicate, and then I think we get a little bit more, a little bit even deeper with like the Apostles stuff too in one of the movies. So yeah, it's just cool. It's just cool to see the movie like finally like take a little bit of form in the series and like a good solid storyline for the rest of the movies, and just the advancement in technology throughout all of the rest of these movies. So yeah, kudos to this movie for kind of like establishing the story a little bit more. And obviously from the third movie, we know that the team was a bit more established, but now they're even more established as we go, and they're all going to end up connecting together in the next movie, right? So yeah, very cool to see. And I guess that's it for this review. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye for now.